Welcome back, Internet Land. This is the Mother Brain, and it's 2013. That means we're going to start our first review of the new year by focusing on a movie that came out last year, of Christmas, of course. And that film was Django Unchained, the latest effort of the legendary and often controversial Quentin Tarantino. And there's a lot of reasons for me to go on to say how much I love this film, even though it's got a share of controversy. The story of the film follows the title character Django, who is a slave separated by his wife Brumilda, as they were both sold and taken away separately to different slave owners. Django gets freed by a German dentist, now turned bounty hunter, named Dr. Schultz, who uses Django because he's able to identify 3 men that he has a bounty after, and Django agrees to help him find these men in exchange for the rediscovery of his wife, who is now being held by another slave owner by the name of Calvin Kindle, who runs a slave owning plantation, ironically enough known as Candyland. What makes Django interesting is, unlike the previous Tarantino movies that were produced independently throughout the 90s, and we're talking about Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown, this feels like Tarantino's most commercial film. It's a very wide range of scope, huge land shots, a huge all-star cast, unlike anything we've seen previously. But also what makes it interesting is, for Tarantino, who's so used to injecting his own voice through his characters, his overuse of pop culture references in all his films, Tarantino finds himself challenged by the simple fact that now he has to create a story that's set in the Old West, and you have to speak that language, and you have to be able to understand the history of this period, being the pre-Civil War era, and have these characters speak as authentically as possible for that time. This has to be, for Jamie Foxx, his most significant role in years. I feel personally, and I've written a blog about this a while back, that after he won the Oscar for Ray, that Jamie got caught up in the Hollywood glitz and glamour, having to be this big-time A-lister, and the projects that he had taken after Ray didn't quite demonstrate his true raw talent. And Django, as some of you may or may not know, was originally intended for Will Smith, who decided to turn it down and play it safe to do his latest film, After Earth, for M. Night Shyamalan. So Jamie came into the fold. It's definitely a risky part to play. While also being, a strong black leading man in this film, he's also having to portray some very unsettling aspects of his character as a slave, and it's quite interesting to see him return to the kind of versatility that he once demonstrated in those earlier films, not just Ray, but also Any Given Sunday for Oliver Stone. Christoph Waltz playing Dr. Schultz. Now, I knew when I first saw Mr. Waltz in Tarantino's previous film, *Inglourious Basterds*, that he was guaranteed to win an Oscar, and this is no exception here. He is just the coolest cat in the entire movie. Anytime they get put into a dangerous situation, this guy seems to have the answers for everything. Whether it's being surrounded by the KKK or being surrounded by a whole town of bigots, it's unbelievable what this guy does, and he's just so likable. He really complements Jamie Foxx in this film, and I think he even brings the best out of Foxx with the dynamic that they have as a duo in this film. Leonardo DiCaprio as the slave-owning Calvin Kindle, and for Leo, who we all know is so used to, at least in the past, being like the boy with the good looks in Titanic, and ultimately transitioning into more dull roles in The Departed and Blood Diamond and Inception, this is definitely a unique role for him, where he's not just playing the villain of the piece, but he's also kind of making fun of these slave owners from that period, and really just doing up the stereotype to a degree where it's laughable, but also he just knows when to turn it on when it comes to his performance. Just his intensity is still intact even after all these years. Kerry Washington reuniting with Jamie Foxx for the first time since Ray. While her part is very low-key, she also shows that she's a big risk taker in her role, and just to be put through all those torture scenes, as some of you might know, there were a lot of reports that she almost had like dehydration and was almost going a little mentally off because of what her character had to go through and endure. Samuel Jackson plays the head slave in Candyland, and basically he's the friend, or the close slave friend of DiCaprio's character. Let's face it, this is probably the most controversial character in the entire movie. Doesn't matter how many N-words get dropped by the white characters in it. Samuel Jackson is the ultimate Uncle Tom in this story, and just the way his character, at least at first, starts to seem like he's just playing another spoof of a typical Samuel Jackson character, he ultimately flips that around at a certain point. I'm not going to spoil that part of the movie. And of course, Tarantino loves to bring in his favorite actors of the 70s and 80s who make cameos in this film. Everybody from Franco Nero, who played the original Django in the old spaghetti westerns with the same title, Bruce Dern, Tom Wopat, and probably the biggest surprise of anybody, Don Johnson. Yes, Miami Vice Don Johnson, who plays a slave owner on a plantation and basically has some of these Brittle Brother characters that Waltz's character is after on his land. Definitely one of the scenes that stands out for me of the entire movie was him and a cameo Jonah Hill having a little bickering discussion with a bunch of KKK members, all complaining about the white sheets over their head. It's one of those very racy things, but I had to laugh because you just know Tarantino's intent by showing how dumb and how stupid these dickheads were back in those days. Yes, I said dickhead, and I will say it again. The KKK were dickheads. I know a lot of people have complained that the movie was a little too long, maybe a half hour too long, but for me, I found myself drawn from the beginning to the end. Every moment counts. Every piece of dialogue, as always for Tarantino's films, is just so catchy and so memorable. And what makes this film so great, again, is the fact that all these characters don't sound alike. Yes, there's a lot of N-word bombing, but everybody's different in some way. We can't complete this review without addressing the big elephant in the room, which is the controversy surrounding the subject matter of this story, as well as the overuse of the N-word. As you probably already know, Spike Lee, the great African-American filmmaker of our generation, had refused to see Django Unchained because of the fact that it was an insult to his ancestors, as well as all of our ancestors of African-American descent. And I respect his opinion and do believe that, yes, that is an era that's hard to joke about because of all the lives lost in the pursuit of freedom at that time. And I do feel personally that I am uncomfortable with the use of the N-word whenever I'm around my friends, whenever I'm around anybody of any color, whether you're black or you're white or you're Asian or Hispanic. It's not a happy, pleasant word to be said any place. That being said, I wasn't going to let Spike's opinion prevent me from seeing Django Unchained in the theaters. I can't recall anybody in 1981 saying that they wouldn't see Raiders of the Lost Ark because of the use of the Nazis as the bad guys. And if Tarantino had done this particular film and not use the N-word and maybe try some other subject matter where race and slavery were not the topic and you still had a black character in place, then you might as well make a sequel to Wild Wild West with Will Smith, where racism is completely ignored in the entire movie that everybody remembers with the gigantic spider. I just didn't feel uncomfortable at all about the story or the overuse of the N-word or the imagery of what these slaves had to endure in that era. To me, it was like what Tarantino does with all his films. He treats his films as novels. And where this movie, of course, doesn't have the whole non-linear structure of Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction, it still feels like you're reading a good book where, yes, that language is used, and yes, that imagery and the things that happen in that time are present in the narrative. And you can't bypass that. You have to be honest and you have to be telling the truth. Tarantino and Spike are completely different filmmakers, and they have their audiences, and they're going to be different in various ways. Don't let your fears and inhibitions prevent you from seeing Django Unchained if you feel like it might be an insult to your family or an insult to your friends. If you love film, if you love cinema, cinema should be escapist entertainment. And occasionally there should be something to say, but always remember that there's a lot more going on beneath the surface. If it's a good movie, I give Django Unchained 4 stars. Arguably one of the best films of 2012, one of Tarantino's best films, and undoubtedly it's just, to me, it works on every level, from the performances to the screenplay to just being a throwback to the old spaghetti westerns and trying to be something that maybe a lot of filmmakers don't have the fortitude to make in this day and age. So until next time, this is the Mother Brain. You can follow us on Coast Blog as well as my Twitter page, and I will be back very soon with more great reviews coming up in 2013, so stay tuned.